everybody. Welcome back. I'm not sure, I don't really have anything planned out as far as an introduction, but today we're just talking about bad advice for podcasting, for podcasters. If you've gone online, you've probably seen some of this bad advice. I see it all the time, and that's what we're going to be talking about. If you're new to the channel, hi, I'm Jesse. I'm a podcast editor, engineer, coach, blah, blah, blah. I also do AI consulting. I help people build automations, help get some time back in their day because we're all spending a lot of time on repetitive tasks that we don't need to be spending time on. And next to me, we've go ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Yeah, I'm Matthew Bliss. I am a podcast producer and editor, soon to be coach. I enjoy long walks on the beach, love sitting down with a good book, and I mostly enjoy at the moment creating my current podcast, Rethinking Podcasting. That's my contribution to the world to help podcasters get across the line a little bit better and build a framework for themselves to think about podcasting advice in a different way, which I think is super important for the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Because part of the reason we can say there's good advice or bad advice, or at the very least we can have a live stream where two people can talk about it, there's sometimes not a definitive answer one way or the other about whether doing a particular thing is good or bad. But there is advice that is definitely bad from the sense that it is certain that it pretends to give good things and actions that a podcaster should be doing that they really shouldn't. And you can have a thinking framework to try and decide how those things happen, or you can sit down with us for the next 90 minutes and we'll tell you what to think. Those ideas are a little bit contrary to each other, but I've got a feeling we've got a good spread of experience across social media, the internet, and podcasting circles to be able to decide and share some of our experiences on that front.
Yep. And I know I've seen it just all over the place. It seems like the overall communal knowledge out there in the internet world has gotten better over the last couple of years. It was really bad around the time of COVID. There was so much bad information, so many people repeating the same things over and over. And we still have that to a degree. That's why so many people still start out with the Blue Yeti. So, since we're talking about the Blue Yeti, let's just go ahead and dive into bad equipment advice.
Sure.
So, one of the first ones we often see is, there we go, trying to figure out the right knobs here. We've got, you need a Rodecaster Pro and an SM7B to sound professional. Thoughts?
That is a lot of money. It's for anyone who's just starting podcasting and has likely seen all of their favorite podcasters on video using the SM7B. And I've even seen a couple flash their Rodecaster in the background or even the foreground sometimes. It's easy to think that that's the necessity. And if people are telling you that you must have this stuff, then it's definitely bad advice from my sense. It's also like over $1,000 worth of equipment before you even get to a microphone. So yeah, that's got to be bad. But at the same time, the equipment isn't necessarily bad for every circumstance. It's just, you should approach it with a bit of consideration, making sure it suits exactly what you need.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's good equipment, but you don't need that to sound professional. I've done a number of these streams with, what was it? a Fifine K688. I compared it to an SM7B. You're not going to hear whatever the price difference is, like a $500 price difference between using that USB mic and a Rodecaster Duo and a 7B. You just aren't going to hear that. And more importantly, your audience doesn't really care. No one is listening because you're using this mic and mixer or you're using this one. They're not going to stop listening because you're using a USB mic. If you're using a Yeti, they might stop let's start that over. If you're using a Yeti in an untreated room, they may stop listening, but not because you're using a USB mic, but because your audio isn't sounding that good. And we'll get to technical stuff in a little bit. And the most important thing with a mic is knowing how to use it. If you have a mic set way back here, you're not going to sound as good. Mic position is more important than the equipment itself. The sound of your room is more important than the equipment itself. If you're recording in a good sounding room, because you've put up acoustic panels, or you're recording in a walk-in closet, or whatever you've done to make it sound good, you can use any mic you want. Any decent mic. You don't want to be using like lav mics or earbuds, AirPods, but any kind of real standalone mic, you're going to get decent, good enough quality.
Yeah, and that's the fun bit about podcasting too. If you're someone who has a big budget and it's not an issue that you can drop a bunch of money on this equipment, that's absolutely fine. But if you end up with what'd you say? It was a Fifine K68 or something?
Yeah.
If you have one of those, which is as close as you can get to a cheap USB-based microphone that sounds like an SM7B, then you take it to your post-production and tune it up and clean it up a little bit in your ideal environment, and you've got an SM7B on the cheap. And that post-production editing aspect allows you to make up for certain aspects that you wouldn't have the budget to pay for, or that you just, as we say, don't need necessarily. So there's swings and roundabouts with all the things that come with equipment. It's more than just buying the tech that makes you a podcaster, you know?
Yeah, I'd rather a solo podcaster, instead of getting a Rodecaster Duo and an SM7B, get the Fifine K688 and spend the rest of that money on acoustic treatment. That's going to give you far better sound, better quality, that requires less post-production than spending all of that money on a Rodecaster and a Shure SM7B.
Yeah. And you can test our spaces as well. Like, you've got the expensive acoustic room treatment that people can sometimes get, or you haven't got that and you've built that yourself. I don't want to presume. But if people look for the panels that you've got sitting at the back in the green and gray, that can sometimes come to more expensive to get all together than the microphone itself. Whereas my space is treated with, I think I can get the camera over for this, just moving blankets that were like €10 each, I think, which is probably about 10 American. And I've got one in front of me and one beside me. And I mean, I haven't taken my extra Blue Yeti for a spin yet, but that's how cheap and simple the room treatment can get. That it doesn't have to break the bank. But as long as you're treating the room, then you're kind of halfway through the battle.
Yeah, there's a ton of ways to treat your room. You don't have to... Yeah, moving blankets are a really cheap, well-proven method for treating acoustics. Not sure how somebody discovered that, but somebody did, and I've seen that all over. I know musicians who, that's how they treat their recording space. They just have a bunch of moving blankets hung up, and that's where they record all of their albums. So if it works for musicians, it's going to be good enough for podcasters. It might not be 100% the same as having really professional high-end acoustic treatment in your space, but it's going to be good enough.
Yeah. Especially if
So,
they don't have to see it. Because
exactly.
it doesn't have to look pretty, as long as it does a good job.
That's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's figure out that one should go down at the bottom. Let's do this one. I got these all out of order. So we'll just go down the list. So
It's all good.
equipment isn't important. This is kind of the flip side of what we were just talking about. I see less of this these days. It was all over the place during the COVID years. And people saying, you can use anything. You can use your phone. Okay, the phone might not be terrible. You can just use whatever you have. Use your laptop mic, use the mic in your AirPods, whatever you have. It doesn't matter because people will listen. And each person has a threshold for what good enough audio is. And we need to be aware as podcasters, as content creators, we're competing with all of the other content out there, not just podcasts. We're more or less fighting for people's free time, the time they can consume whatever content you're creating. And if your audio doesn't sound that good, that makes it easier for them to choose a competing podcast or a different podcast altogether, or maybe they'll go listen to an audiobook, go listen to some music. So the equipment is important to a degree, but that law of diminishing returns kicks in pretty quickly. Like we were talking about, the Fifine K688, I think that's like a $70 USD mic compared to the SM7B, which is, I think, 379, 400, somewhere around there. You're not getting a $300 improvement in your audio quality. So there's a good baseline there. Getting a good USB dynamic mic is going to be a really good start. But to say that the equipment isn't important is kind of missing the point as well.
Yeah, and it's funny. I've been in a few social media threads over the last couple of days where people have said, like, content is the most important thing. Podcasters should be focusing on the content. That's the thing they have to get right. And, the equipment, they shouldn't be thinking about the equipment at all. It's about getting the content exactly perfect for the ideal audience and niche. But the way that I like to frame the approach to this for the listener is that they're not actively looking for it, but if you give them enough reasons to turn off, they're going to turn off and look for a more comfortable activity. You want to give them every reason to stay. And creating a good listening experience is going to be one of the ways that you can do that. And how do you do that? You don't have to spend $1,000 on equipment to be able to make that happen. But you need to put in a little bit of effort sometimes to make sure that the listening experience is okay. And if not okay, then great. And even if it's not a competition, even if you're just doing it for yourself, you don't want to give people a reason to switch off your show. And your standards can sometimes change. Like I've actually found that my wife, being a dedicated podcast listener like myself has been for the last 10 years, 15 years, she's now pointing out episodes to me that she's struggling to get through because she can hear how bad they are. And these are sometimes shows produced in studios. We'll call it out because they're big enough. And just like that, the show that is the follow-up from Sex and the City. the showrunners or whatever celebrities they have talking on that show, apparently the experience is so poor that my wife has to struggle through that show. But she loves the show so much, she'll listen to the podcast without while dealing with all those extra things. But she likes to point it out to me every so often, like, hey, if I wasn't all about this TV show, I would be switching these guys off straight away. And it can even be with the expensive equipment that you have this issue. Because I actually noticed it yesterday. There was a podcast that I saw. I'll have to look it up so I can share it with you. But it was talking to, I think her name's Grace Andrews. She was the social media specialist for Diary of the CEO. Now, they were filming and recording in a pub with lav mics on their lapels. And I found myself getting really tired listening to them because they were shouting at each other across the space. The audio, because it's in lavs, and sometimes the lav would be pinned on one side and they'd be talking on the other side. The audio improvement to happen there, and the amount of compression they had to try and get the volume up to snuff. I actually found what I'd never experienced before, but you've mentioned on one of these live streams we've done, Jesse, where you just get tired listening to it. Even though you know it's in a decent space, you can't really hear the echo. The volume's right. Everyone's the same volume level, but that compression is so harsh because they've had to post-produce the audio to get it to a stage where it's acceptable. You just get fatigued listening to it. And that's another reason to switch off, even if people can't figure out why they're tired listening to it. You want to give people as few reasons as possible to turn off your show. Equipment isn't important for some aspects, but if you get the equipment right and you get the post-production right, then you give people every reason to enjoy your show.
Yeah, you make a couple of really good points, and I see that the whole comment of content is king all the time. And it's not an either or. It's not you need to prioritize content over your audio, or you need to prioritize your audio over your content. Those are both parts of your foundation. They are both equally important. And the content is king people don't quite seem to see that. The production as a whole, everything that goes into it, is important. If your audio's not good, you're not going to be able to get someone to listen long enough to find out that, hey, this show has really good content. And the example with your wife, the bigger the reputation, the more popular you are, the more famous you are, whatever, you get away with lower quality audio because people, one, shows like what you're talking about, they're getting paid to do these shows. They're being produced by companies. They aren't doing this for fun. Maybe they are doing it for fun, but they're getting paid to show up. They're not responsible for the production. The people you see on screen, the people you're hearing, they're being paid to be there. That's all there is to it. They don't care if they get 500,000 listens or 20,000. They're getting paid the same either way. So the bigger your following, the more clout you have, the more you've built up that reputation in other places where people know they can trust you to have good content. You can get away with lower quality audio. And I don't mean put no effort into it, but people are going to be a little more forgiving of small issues, let's say, because they know you're providing really good value. At least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, no, they'll muscle through things that they would switch off otherwise because they're desperate to hear what the content is. And that sounds like a trade-off that you can make if you can guarantee that the content is going to be good enough, that the audio quality can take a dive. But why take that risk? Like, just put in a bit of effort with the equipment, do a bit of finessing at the beginning. And what I responded in the comment with thread that I mentioned before with, don't do it, make it a one and done, where you have the time to dedicate to improve the equipment or the output if you can, and the equipment is one of those things. Dedicate some time to it. Maybe take a seasonal break and develop further content after that. Like, you can adapt where you put your attention. You don't have to have 100% one way or 100% the other. It's why I say certainty. If someone's giving you certainty about a thing in podcasting, they're giving you the wrong advice. Like, it's all about being adaptable, reflecting, changing direction as you need to, and improving as time goes on.
Exactly. Do you think we have to even go into the Blue Yeti, or should we touch on it for just a moment?
I tell you what, I'll give you what I tell people about the Blue Yeti, and you can bounce off that and add whatever you need to, because the Blue Yeti is a poorly designed microphone. In fact, I have a YouTube video that I can reference for people from Tom Buck, where he has an old Blue Yeti, buys a brand new one, picks it to pieces, like the hardware itself, and compares it across, I think it was probably 8 years between the two microphones being created, the same Blue Yeti. There was very little difference in the design. And they've got like microphones haphazardly kind of stitched together so they can get the omnidirectional. You got the cardioid, and we know that the gain is too much and it picks up too much of the room. The quality isn't good. All those things are a given. That being said, for a podcaster who starts off with the Blue Yeti either by accident or intentionally and wants to be an excellent post-producer of content, so someone who gets really good at finding out how they need to treat their space, how they can improve and finesse the quality of the audio, learn mic technique, figure out the hardware you need to avoid certain vocal tics that you have, like plosives or sharp S's. All of these things make the Blue Yeti an excellent training microphone. It's how I got to where I am in such a short time. I hated my voice once I started hearing the things I was saying on my Blue Yeti when I first started my podcast. And you can hear how I edited it up to what I do today. The Teaching Culture Cast. If you look that up, you'll hear what my original post-production was like. So if you want to get really good at the aspects of editing and treating the room and just dialing everything up to 11, eventually, the Blue Yeti is a great microphone to learn the technical aspects of podcasting. But if you're going to sit on the Blue Yeti and make no effort, talk into the end, even though it's a side address microphone, and just say, I've got a Blue Yeti and this is it. This is the microphone we're using, with no thought to seek improvement, then I'm not sure it's really going to be the best microphone for you. That is my opinion. It makes great podcasters. It doesn't make great podcasts. What do you think?
I think that, one, it's where it is because of its marketing, and it was one of the very first, if not the first, sort of desktop USB mic 20 years ago or whenever it came out. That's why it gets recommended so often, because in the early beginning days of podcasting, for most people, that was their only choice, unless you wanted to spend thousands of dollars on an audio interface and a mic and figuring out how to do all of that stuff. It's not a bad mic. It's definitely not a good mic. It's not even a good sounding condenser mic. It's a very cheap sounding condenser mic, like all condensers in that under $200 price range. I mean, Rode might have one that's just under 200, like the NT1, NT1A. I think it's around that price point, but maybe I'm thinking of a different model. That
But I
doesn't
think
really
that'd
matter.
be it. They have that as a USB based microphone now as well.
I think that's probably the cheapest condenser that I've heard that sounds pretty decent, especially for the price. Condenser mics get expensive really quickly. And for singers, they often spend $10,000 plus on a really good mic. For voiceover, they use like the standards, the Neumann U87. That's like a $3,800 mic. So people that think the Shure SM7B is an expensive mic, look into the world of high-end condenser mics. So you can't expect a $120 Blue Yeti to sound very good compared to a $3,800 condenser mic. I'm sure Podcastage probably has a comparison that has a Blue Yeti and U47 or U87. It would be interesting to hear. Some people will hear a difference, others won't. But yeah,
Yeah.
Blue Yeti, not a great starter mic, but you can learn a lot. But I'm sure a lot of people have also quit podcasting because they used it and it sounds terrible and they don't know how to fix it. So they just give up instead.
Yeah. It's a trial by fire for sure. I wouldn't recommend everybody do it. That's probably something I should tack onto my opinion. It makes great podcasters, but it's like asking someone to walk barefoot through a stony quarry to get to their next meal. Like it's not a fun ride, and it takes a while. It took me about probably a year and a half with it to get to the stage where I knew what I was doing with it.
And that's part of the learning process. So I'm sure we've talked about some of these, but let's move into bad technical advice. And technical, that's editing, anything that is more technical in nature that isn't related to the content or the equipment. So the first one we've got here is you don't need to edit. Editing removes authenticity. Thoughts, opinions. Is this good advice or is it bad advice?
I think it is bad advice. And I mean, we can unpack what the word authentic means here. I think a lot of people equate authentic with like I'm in the room with them. And I think, funnily enough, this comes up with a lot of videographers who dive into podcasting too. I think anyone who feels like they need room tone in the background of a podcast episode needs to hear this as well. Like, that's not authenticity, that's maybe accuracy for the space that they're in. But there are many different aspects of editing. There is audio quality improvement. There is cutting and removing content. There is making conversations more efficient. There's restructuring the conversation to say something different than the chronology of the actual conversation that was recorded. There are lots of different ways to approach it. And if you are not editing at all, then I think you are doing yourself a disservice. If not only because you can't guarantee that what you've done as a raw recording is going to be something that the listener wants, but also when you're creating a podcast, odds are you have a vision for what you want podcast episodes to be. And if you're not editing to get to that, you're going to have a very hard time. And this is where products like StreamYard and, things that are like a do it, Restream is another one that I was thinking of there. Do it all at the time so you don't need to edit afterwards. Doing it during production makes it much harder for you, especially when you encounter errors and mistakes. And that pressure of getting it right the first time, that makes it incredibly hard for you too. So I think you can be authentic and you can edit. And you can edit as much or as little as you want. As long as you're editing, you're doing the right thing.
But Joe Rogan doesn't edit. And I think that goes into what you were just talking about. When you're a big show like that, no, they don't need to edit because they have a team of people. They have all of the equipment that they need to make sure that everybody's levels are right, that they're getting the right loudness, so that when they're done recording, it's good to go. You don't need to trim anything out. You also have a huge, massive following, so that makes it easier to leave some of that stuff in. Your average podcaster probably won't be able to get away very easily with a 2 to 3 hour podcast every week. Some people might, but you have to have a very certain type of personality. You have to have a very loyal audience, and that's just not going to work for everybody. So I think we can get into this a little bit later, but just because this big podcast doesn't edit doesn't mean your podcast doesn't need editing, because you don't have an audio engineer running everything, making sure that everything is compressed just right, that everything's EQ'd to make sure everybody's sounding good, that you have everything at the proper loudness. Most shows don't have that. It's challenging to do all of this stuff live and have it ready to go so you can just publish as soon as you're done. Even like this live stream, we could probably stand to EQ a little bit. We could compress the audio some. But we're just putting this out on YouTube. Our loudness it's not out of line. It could probably be a little bit louder, but it's going to be fine for a live stream. It would be problematic if I was coming in really loud and Matthew was coming in really quiet. I think we've actually had that once when we had a technical difficulty. So I went through and I remixed it. But that's the way things go. But I think you have a really good point. Editing, it's become a catch-all phrase for post-production. And you laid out all of the different elements that can be done. You don't have to cut out content. That's not something that always needs to be done. Some people are really good and concise, and they've done a lot of pre-production to make sure they don't have to do a lot of post-production. So maybe they've outlined stuff really well. They have a really good process in place. So they outline things, they record, they're ready to go. They just need to clean up the audio side of things. Other people, they have a lot of guests, maybe themselves. They and get off tangents or get off on tangents. So there might be some content there to clean up. Every show is going to be different. And yeah, that's all there is to it. We need to generally be doing some kinds of post-production. Audio, I think, is almost always needed, unless you have found a way to get your loudness up to native 16 LUFS without completely compressing the audio live. And that's going to be really challenging. And you're living life on the edge because all it takes is for a setting to not be right, and you're either super compressing things or things aren't getting compressed enough. I don't recommend trying to mix in a live setting, trying to get your loudness when you record.
Yeah. It's like cooking. If you slow cook a burger on a pan, you're going to have a long time that you need to spend watching the burger cook but it's unlikely to burn. Whereas if you've got the burger on the pan at a really high temperature and you want to get it exactly right the first time, if you leave it for too long, it's going to burn. And I think that burnt sound is what you're talking about. That's what immediately came to my mind when you talked about the compression being off. Like, if it's too loud and too compressed, it just sounds burnt out and it's not good. And with the editing available to you, you just give yourself a bit of headroom, make it a little bit quieter, and you've got the opportunity afterwards to give it a quick boost. And also to say that editing doesn't also imply it being labor intensive. Like for me, I would say I edit, well, the first episode of Rethinking Podcasting anyway, if you go and listen to it, it's an entirely scripted episode, but I have a template that the episode sits into, that I recorded into. I've got the presets for my microphone dialed in, so I just applied them, slightly adjusted the compression and the loudness, gave it a boost, and out it went. There was no content edit there. I wasn't actually doing the audio tuning in entirely every single time. Just that one time I did it and had a template that I applied, and it came out as I wanted it to. That's also editing. It doesn't have to be the 3-4 hour job that editors talk about online. You can refine that process enough so you can say that you are editing, but it's not the huge job that it shouldn't be every time, but that it can be if you don't do these things right.
Yeah, with the audio, when I do a video, I'm doing very little. I basically bring it into Hindenburg, drop on my preset, and export. That's all I'm doing. Because with video, I've already gone through and done whatever edits need to be done. But the big thing that saves editing time is the amount of effort you put into the pre-production. The more you plan things out, the more you outline or do whatever's going to work for you, whether that's an outline or scripting, whatever it is, the more effort you put in on the front end generally equates to less effort on the back end. So it depends on where you want to spend your time. I find that the people who plan end up spending less time on things than the people that don't. People that don't plan.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to leads who say, well, I have a 90-minute, my episodes or I record 90 minutes of audio, but I need to get it down to 45. Well, why are you recording 90 minutes of audio if your episodes are 45 minutes? Well, I get off on tangents and whatever. Okay, well, if you want to keep costs down for yourself, hiring an editor, you need to start figuring out how to make your recordings shorter, more concise, because it's going to cost you more to try to edit a 90-minute recording down to 45 minutes versus recording for 50 minutes and just trimming out the little bits of imperfection to bring it down to 45.
And this is an equivalency we've talked about before, but the people who are the we'll just fix it in post people, who are happy for anything to go, anything to happen in the recording, but they have these constraints and they leave it for themselves later to fix it up. Sometimes that is the feeling that people equate with editing as well. When you say editing, sometimes they think they've done whatever they want, gallivanted about in conversations and tangents or whatever, and now the editing has to happen. They've left it to the post-production team to fix it. Editing isn't fixing necessarily if you do the things you talked about there. Like if you know you want a 45-minute show, don't do a 90-minute show. Catch yourself on the tangents. Keep it reined in, especially if you're on your own. It can be a bit harder sometimes, but... Or you make a Patreon. hire the editor, have the members pay to get the raw version of you going all tangential, and then use that money to pay for the editor to get the 45 to get more listeners. I don't know. Anyway, editing's a fickle one, isn't it?
It is. We kind of touched on this, but bad technical advice. You can record anywhere and just use Adobe Enhanced Speech to clean it up. It's amazing. And just using your example of the show you were listening to that was recorded in a pub, it shows why recording anywhere isn't the best idea. And even if, Adobe Enhanced Speech, there's a reason I refer to it as the voice destroyer, because it just mangles audio. It can do, I think the people that talk about how amazing it is are people who have really bad audio, because sometimes that is the only thing that can salvage it, but it does not sound good. You do not want to fix that in post. You don't want to just record in terrible sounding spaces and rely on noise reduction to make it sound better. Because the more you apply noise reduction, stuff like enhanced speech, it doesn't matter if it's a plugin like Isotope RX or Supertone Clear, DX Revive Pro, Descript's Studio Sound. The more you push them, the worse your audio sounds. And then when you have to compress your audio on top of that, it's going to make it sound even worse. So you're now starting to sound like really bad Zoom recordings because you didn't care to put any effort into where you record.
But that's it. Like, the Adobe Enhance is great if something has stuffed up and you need to salvage the thing. Like, there's a reason the Sound Speeds channel, which was referred on from Podcastage, there's a reason that him as a boom microphone operator tests Adobe Enhance in environments that are not ideal, like walking around having a conversation with someone in the middle of a mall, or being next to a busy freeway and gradually getting a longer and longer and longer boomer pole with the microphone, getting as far as, I think he probably got like 20 or 30 feet in the air, and it repaired the audio that he was putting into it. But you're not recording a podcast like that. And I tried to, you were talking there, I was trying to come up with an analogy that appropriately describes what it does to good things. But the only one I could think of off the top of my head was like trying to trim a bush. Like, if it's been unkempt, if it's been left for a year, there's like branches sticking out of it. Adobe Enhance is the big hedge trimmer that is just big, it's broad, it chops the edges off. It doesn't really matter how it looks at the end, as long as it looks okay, because it looked awful at the start. But if you've got a well-maintained hedge, every 2 weeks it's been nice and trimmed, and you take that hedge trimmer to it, it's going to take away good stuff as well as take away the bad stuff. And that's Adobe Enhance on good recordings that are set up well. You don't need Adobe Enhance for setups like we've got here. You use that, it is the vocal destroyer. But if it's a windy day, if there's a storm in the background and you happen to want to record a podcast, it can probably salvage your recording. I think that's what it's for. And that's the risk and the advice that I would tell people. Don't buy into marketing, because all of the podcast apps, tech products, even microphones sometimes, Blue Yeti you mentioned before, they all market themselves as being the ideal solution. But there are ways to use these tools, and there are ways you shouldn't use them. And if you go back to the start, if you've got a Rodecaster and an SM7B, and you're piping whatever audio you've recorded with that setup through Adobe Enhance, you might as well have just lit that $1,000 on fire. Like, it's not going to do you any favors.
No. And I don't know if it's gotten better, but last time I tested it, which was probably a year ago now, it struggles with female voices. Whether it's it struggles with anything that's well recorded because it doesn't know what to do, so it overdoes it with EQ. But with female voices, it can change them to the point of not really sounding like that person. That's why I gave it the nickname Voice Destroyer. And I think when you were talking about the analogy with the hedges, what I thought of was Adobe Enhanced Speech is like hiring the teenager down the street, giving him a chainsaw to go and clean this up. That's what Adobe Enhanced Speech is. Yeah, the kid will get things trimmed down, but it's not going to look good.
Mm-hmm. And that's the funny thing. A lot of these products are marketing led because you don't hear podcasts that aren't talking about podcasting talking about their post-production process. So you don't know if someone has used Adobe Enhance or not, unless you've got ears like we do and you can probably pick up when they do. But you don't know what a good recording out of Adobe Enhance sounds like, unless someone tells you, I did this in Adobe Enhance and this is what it sounds like. So that kid who you've hired to trim your hedges with a chainsaw, he told you, yeah, there's next town over. I've done a ton of houses over there and they really love my work. There's no way for you to authenticate that unless you go over to those houses and say, have a look at their hedges and go, did he do a good job? No, you just hired a kid on good marketing who said he could do the job and he only wanted $10 for it. So you paid him and he destroyed your hedges.
Yep. Yeah. And I get tired of seeing companies like Riverside, Adobe, Descript, all of them do this. Use our service and you'll get studio quality recordings. No. You're getting uncompressed 48K, 44:1, 16-bit recordings. That has nothing to do with the studio sound or a studio recording. That has everything to do with the acoustics and the sound of the space and the engineer running the session. None of these services provide that. They have to offer things like enhanced speech or magic audio or studio sound to help clean it up, but that's still not giving you studio quality recordings. Just a little pet peeve with the way they market that aspect of their service.
Totally fair though. Studio quality, they all use it as a term. And if that's what studio quality means, I don't know why anyone would go to a studio. It's like taking the Michelin star from the restaurants and putting it onto marketed frozen products in supermarkets instead. It waters down what that actually means. But anyway, that can be for another time.
Okay, so you have to leave some ums in or it will sound unnatural. I guess I sound unnatural because other than talking about ums themselves, you're not going to hear me So if we think about this from a technical standpoint, if ums are required to sound natural, anything that doesn't have ums will sound unnatural. Do newscasts sound unnatural? They don't There are people in this planet that do not And this kind of ties back into editing removes authenticity because a lot of times we're removing a lot of the filler words. What we need to really pay attention to is people a lot more when they're being recorded than they do in normal conversation. So taking those out isn't removing any authenticity because you're actually making it sound more like that person talking to you in a room when they're not being recorded. Because I sit in on a bunch of recording sessions as the remote engineer. Everybody's talking before the show. Everything's good. No real ums. They talk after the show. Nobody's umming. But you hit record. The first half of the show, there's a lot of ums. Then they start to feel a little more comfortable. They're not paying attention so much to being recorded, and they're focused more on the conversation. You find that they start umming less about halfway through. So I don't buy into this whole, you need to leave in some ums or it'll sound unnatural, because some people don't A lot of people know how to speak really articulately. If you remove them when they can be, no one is going to ever know they were there. And I've never seen a comment of, well, I stopped listening to this podcast because there weren't enough ums.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, right? Like, take it to the complete end zone. How many podcasts have you turned off listening to because you realized that they never used a filler word? I don't think anyone misses them. I do think that this is an argument from the people who don't want to have to do as much post-production as they probably should or would prefer to. And it leans back into the authenticity thing again. Like, what is authentic? Is or your authentic message inclusive of these filler words? Sometimes it might be. Sometimes it's silence that has a lot of impact and a lot of weight. But attacking it from the other side that you mentioned right at the end there, does anybody miss them? And does it change your message or the quality of your show or how listeners enjoy it if they aren't there? And if it's a no, then I mean, you might make the choice to leave them in which case it's not about it being unnatural, it's how you want to do your show. And no one can say no to that. Like, that's your choice. But if you can remove them, and it even enhances the quality of the experience for the listener, then do it. It doesn't have to be a rule. Like, it's not about authenticity. Authenticity is in realizing the ideal version of the work that you want to put out in the world. And if it sounds like that, and there's no ums in it, that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, and no one's going to stop listening just because there are some ums either. The thing with ums or filler words is once they become a distraction, that's when you start to increase the chances of somebody stopping. Each person's going to have their own threshold of that. So do what you want to do with that information. It's your show. You decide what you want. I've worked with shows where they want to keep things really conversational and natural sounding. So they told me they don't want the ums cut. If they actually listened back to the raw audio, they'd realize how many of them are there. And even though I leave in a good number, it sounds conversational, but it's not to the point where they're a distraction either. I work with other shows where it's branded, they talk to executives. They want everybody sounding as professional and as smart as possible. So in those instances, the directive is try to remove as many as possible.
Yeah. And that's technical direction, right? Like, they know they're going to do it. If they know they don't want them and you remove them, it's fine. And sometimes it is natural to leave them in. I think the case also needs to be made that if they are cut poorly, that's when people will figure it out too. Like, if you're using a filler word remover, like a one button kind of thing, like what Descript has, I think Riverside has it too, and it kind of misses one a little bit, and you're in the middle of a sentence and it cuts to the next word, and you can like feel where that difference happened and you can hear it, that's a bad removal. And you probably should have left it in as opposed to removing it, because the seam is visible, you know?
That takes us nicely into this next one. Descript in Riverside lets me sound like I hired a pro editor, but it's really DIY. And it's those types of things, those bad edits. I think it's also partially responsible for where people talk about their issues with editing, that it makes things sound robotic or removes authenticity. It removes authenticity because you can hear that it's being edited. Something that's edited well, you would never be able to know what was edited, if it was edited, because you can't hear it. It's not like video where if you make it an edit, make a cut, and you don't do anything, it's visible because you've got the jump cut. There's a lot of edits that are done because they can be in video, they can be hidden by changing the camera angle, by adding B-roll. There's little tips and tricks to mask them sometimes. But you're not going to be able to mask, if you were to try to edit a video podcast the way you edit an audio podcast, you're never going to find ways to hide every single one of those cuts. And I see people online in editing groups talk about how it takes them like 10 times longer to edit video than it does audio. If it's taking you that much longer, I would have to look at how you're approaching this. My guess is you're trying to edit the video the same way you edit audio. And they're two different mediums. It's kind of like writing a pop or rock song versus scoring for a movie. They're both pieces of music, but the approach is going to be completely different just because of how it's being used. Video, you can try to chop out all of the ums and uhs and filler words, but it's going to start looking pretty choppy with a lot of your typical guests. You can hide some of it, but if you're trying to approach it the same way, you're spending a lot of extra time, because having that visual element, people are more forgiving of some of those things they wouldn't be with audio only. Because with audio only, we're consuming it with only our ears. So we're hyper focused on that. With video, we're probably watching it, we're listening to it. We might even be doing other things. I mean, I guess that applies to the audio, but the more senses that are being involved, the more we're less bothered by smaller issues.
Yeah. And I could see where you slowed down a little bit there to think about how you're explaining this. It's a difficult one because it it leans away from the point we're talking about here with the one-touch Descript Riverside editors, but I've done this exploration for myself in DaVinci Resolve Studio, where I've had a extremely heavily cut video podcast with reviews from someone that has submitted them, and I need to make those changes, and tried to resolve, as it were, those video cuts to try and make those changes to optimize for the audio experience, but then make up for it in the video where I can. And there is like a morph cut you can use. There's a cross dissolve you can use, but invariably you try to use those. The transitions are still there, whether it's a jump cut, whether it's a morphing from one scene to the other. If it's too big of a change, it's still going to look very visible, and that video experience isn't going to be as ideal as you want it to be. But bringing it back to the Descript and River side of things, the pro editor thing there, I think, as a broad general theory, is with the accessibility of podcast editing through these means, the average podcast quality is starting to reduce over time to hit a median point that is incredibly different, an average that is incredibly different to what it used to be. And that becomes the pro because of the marketing from these companies that say studio quality, pro editor, do it this way, and you get that label straight away. Then the classification changes. And then we get people saying things like, oh, if you do too much editing and post-production, then it's not as authentic. But these same people will sometimes do a Riverside edit with a pro editor and end up with potentially a less aligned product to what they presume it would be. But they, again, don't have the time to put in to spend the 10 hours and then 6 hours and then 4 hours and then however long it would take once you get the practice in to do those edits properly. And I say that with all the privilege of being an editor who's done a lot of video podcasts for people. I've seen people talk about that 10 times number for the time it takes to do video episodes as well. And I kind of looked at it and went, well, how much are you learning and repeating and bringing into a workflow that you can make as efficient as possible to get to that stage where it becomes faster? Or are you doing video versions versus audio versions? Or like, what are you doing? I don't know. But anyway, I think what a professional edit has changed because of the technology that's available and the marketing that's associated with these products that people kind of relate the experiences to.
And that's really bad news for us who offer podcast editing services. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but it is exactly that. That kind of mindset is what is quickly devaluing the value of our services. Because everybody's looking at, well, we can hire anybody to just use a text-based editor to edit this. It sounds fine to us. Why should I pay somebody hundreds of dollars per episode? Why should I pay $1,000 or more each month to have a professional editor edit my podcast when this is only part of a marketing strategy, not that different from posting to social media on a regular basis? And for a lot of people, that's what a podcast is. It's just like social media, blogs, whatever. It's another piece of content they have to churn out to meet whatever their goals are. And I think that brings us nicely to our next category of just general bad advice for podcasters. We've talked about a lot of it already. Let's see what we've got here. We've talked about the content is king and how people will overlook really bad audio if your content is great. I think the big takeaway that we talked about earlier, in case any of you missed that, is all of your whole production is your foundation. If one part of that is weak, your structure isn't going to stand up well. So try to make every part of the production as good as you can. Yes, the content is what people are tuning in for. They're not tuning in because of just because of how great your show sounds. People might say that, but unless you're doing a show about sound like 20,000 hertz, no one is tuning in just because your show sounds good. Yeah, the content is important, but it needs to be one part of your focus. That should be the thing you actively focus on. Because once you get your audio quality worked out, if you're doing video, once you get that part figured out, once you get the structure of your show figured out, the only thing left for you to really think about is the content. But once you get that foundation in place, you can put all of your effort into the content and you're going to be good. But if you start out without that foundation, and you're just starting out with your podcast and you're only focused on the content because people tell you content is king and they'll overlook bad audio if you have really good content, you're probably going to be in that group of people who last 6 or 7 episodes and then quit, or you pod fade after a season.
Yeah. And it does, like, that's not us saying that you have to pick one or the other as well. Like I said, it's building a foundation. Maybe the first couple of episodes you get that structure in. Then you'll listen back, see what you can improve, watch your Tuesday live stream with Jesse and Matt and hear them talking about how you can improve your space, reduce that reverb, get a mic that's a quality and within budget that you can definitely use, that isn't a Blue Yeti, and then start playing around with those things. Start with content at 80%, the rest at 20%, then flip it for a little bit. 80% to 20% for audio quality and technical structure, and then let the content sit by the wayside for a little bit. And when you've got that balance, then you can let that foundation run and then start exploring and innovating. Give yourself room to adjust between them.
And that is part of any type of content you're creating. You can't sit back and, well, I won't start until I have my audio and video perfect. Because one, you're probably never going to start. But a big part of it is there's a learning experience there. Even if you don't post your first 5 episodes, you need to record them to be able to learn what's lacking, learn what's going well, and be able to iterate and adjust until you get to where you want to be. Whether you do that in public or in private is up to you. I think if I were to advise people, I would tell them record 4 or 5 episodes and we're never going to release them. We're going to use those to help you get comfortable with recording yourself, with hearing the sound of your voice, hearing how your equipment is sounding in your room. Are there any areas we can improve? How's your camera? How's your background? What can we work on in terms of the performance, the structure of the show? Use those first 4 or 5 episodes, go through the entire process as if you were going to release them. But use that to really learn and improve so that when you record your first real episode that's going to be released, you've already had that learning experience of having done 4 or 5 episodes. And I think that learning curve is pretty quick once you actually start doing the thing. You'll learn quite a bit over those first 4 or 8 episodes. I know I did. I just forced myself to get into recording video content. Used whatever I had for the video. Start out with a really bad webcam. Again, don't fall for marketing. Because I started with a really bad webcam that the marketing said it was great. I saw people online talk about, yeah, it's really good. It wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I only learned, okay, I can see the problems now with webcam quality video. I tried the built-in webcam in my computer display. Not any better. Went to my phone. Okay, now I can see a difference. But I don't want to take my phone out of the protective case, mount it every time that I want to record. I know me. The more steps I have to go through to record, the harder it is for me to get the motivation to record. When I want to record, I want to be able to just turn everything on, hit start, record, and be done with it. And these are the types of things we learn as we start to do it. We figure out what's important to me, what's going to get in the way of my process. And that's why you don't want to wait until you have everything perfect to start.
Yeah. And you'll never be perfect.
No.
Like I've been doing it for ages. I'm onto my fourth microphone, and been through tons of plugins, edited hundreds. Actually, I should count how many episodes I've edited for other people's shows as well as my own. And I'm on to podcast for myself, podcast number like 7 or 8. I'm not perfect. I still find issues that I need to clean up and fix, and little tweaks I can make to my process, either through content or through technical, to be able to fix it. If you wait until you're perfect, then you'll never be perfect. And you'll never be perfect anyway, so you'll never start. But yeah, all the stuff you hit on there, you don't learn any of it until you start driving a podcast or content or whatever, it is that you're trying to do. You can sit down and try and ruminate and think of all the possible scenarios that could come up, but it's the things that you don't see, and having the resilience to be ready to see what is happening, what isn't happening that you don't like, and being able to test it until you get to the stage where it's easy. It's the only way.
There's no shortcut for experience. There's the whole 10,000 hours thing. You need to gain that experience to become really good at what you do. You'll never get really good at what you do if you don't ever start. We all start somewhere. Don't be ashamed to start at the bottom, because we all start somewhere. And at some point, we all were starting at the bottom. What you see from us now is not where we started out. Both of us spent a lot of time on different aspects to get to where we are now. That's what experience brings to the table. Okay, here's another good one. All podcasts must be on YouTube. This has been really popular over the last year or so. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it has. I think I went on a tirade maybe a couple of months back about some spam emails that a couple of my clients got that were very well constructed to give them FOMO and feel like they were leaving views and potential listeners on the table by not having their podcast on YouTube, which I think is absolute bollocks. There's no way that that's the case. But I don't think they have to be on YouTube the same way that all podcasts don't need to be on Apple Podcasts or don't need to be on Spotify. They don't even need to be anywhere. I actually talked to someone this morning that listened to their podcasts through Podbean, which amazed me. I didn't even realize the listening experience for that app was a particular thing. But it's possible that someone can host on Podbean and have listeners on Podbean and go nowhere else in the podcasting ecosystem. But that's the equivalency I'd make. It is a place that you can distribute your podcast now, very low effort. But it's when people start talking about YouTube and its benefits, like discoverability, like algorithmic recommendations, like video solves all of your podcast discovery problems, regardless of what that video quality is, as long as you've got it, that's when it starts to be a problem. And that's when the tired conversation we always have about structuring your show for a front-ended experience to meet the packaging that you're trying to build for the show on YouTube, like structuring that content for the platform, that's something that you need to do if you want to get all these benefits that people talk about. You can't just put your podcast up there and do nothing with it and expect YouTube to do all the work for you to get these listeners for you. That being said, as I said at the start, you don't need to be there, in my opinion. And you may go there, but don't expect, unless you put the effort in, for magic to happen, I guess.
Yeah.
Would that align to what you would say?
Pretty much. I think that not all shows are going to perform well on YouTube. Some shows will, like you were saying, they'll need to be modified for the platform. for it to perform well. But I think the biggest thing for podcasters and YouTube is more, it's probably a better place to be using to promote and market your show than just social media. Because let's face it, social media, you're pretty much just posting, promoting to people that already know you. A lot of them probably don't even care that you have a podcast. If you've gotten to the point where you can build a community on Facebook, that's going to be a little bit different. But how many people are going to be in your podcast community group who aren't already subscribed to your podcast? So this whole, we'll just go ahead and add this to the list. The whole thing that you need to promote 3 times a week to each social platform to promote your show. A lot of your promotion on social media is going to people who already know about you and your show. Okay, maybe it's worth posting there. I don't know. I don't think there's a lot of return on that, because unless you're getting people sharing your posts, and that's where something like YouTube really comes in handy, because you get the searchability and discoverability. You've got the shorts. There are far more people on shorts than, let's face it, any of us have on our social media feeds as friends, followers, whatever the terminology is. YouTube has a much bigger audience than any of us have on our own. So that's going to be a huge plus in terms of promotion and marketing. Same thing with putting your show on there. If you do choose to put your show on YouTube, don't just do the bare minimum of, well, I have an audio only show, I'm just going to put a static image or some kind of generic video with it just to put it up. Because the algorithm is smart enough to know nobody's watching this. Because people don't go to YouTube to listen to an audio only podcast that has a static image or some kind of generated background video. People go there because they like seeing the people. They like to interact with the show. That's one of the other things YouTube really has going for it, is it makes it easier to build a community with your listeners without having to create a dedicated community on some other platform. It's a central place where you can interact with your people. If you're doing a live stream, you can interact with them in real time. You have comments. I know Podcasting 2.0 has a comments function, but most players don't implement it. It seems a little bit clunky. Some people don't even know it exists. It's just not the same experience as you get on YouTube. So that's my whole take. There are benefits to being on YouTube, but if you're an audio only show and you don't have any desire to go with video, there's no reason for you to. Audio only podcasting isn't going away. You still have your own audience. YouTube is great if you're trying to attract a new audience. It helps with growth. But if you're happy with where you're at, you're happy being an audio only show, don't let people tell you you need to do this.
Yep. Don't expect the magic. And I think, because you brought in the social media as well, I think the mindset to have when you're thinking about what's going to work and what isn't is the value. What is someone going to get as value from what's being put here? Someone isn't going to value an audio-only static image video of a podcast on YouTube as much as they would other kinds of content on YouTube. So it's not going to get prioritized, despite all the things YouTube is trying to do to push podcasting forward a little bit, like recommendations of podcast feeds on the homepage, or having a podcast homepage entirely. I'm not even sure where that's at the moment. But if you want to drive value for the audience for YouTube, then does just a video version of your audio podcast do that? And if that doesn't engage them, how can you take the content that you do for your audio podcast and put that in a medium on YouTube that still works? And is it being repurposed, or are you creating entirely new content? The same way that you should think about social media, where maybe 1% of the people who engage with you on social media will find their way to your podcast. But otherwise, they're there on the social platform, for that community, and engaging with the content you put there. And if that's all they want, that's where they're going to stay. So think about the value. Audio podcasting isn't going anywhere, even though we just had a massive restructuring of Amazon's Wondery arm, blaming video podcasting for killing all of these jobs that people once had. It's about thinking intentionally about what the content is doing for you. And if it's in the YouTube space and it's not delivering value for the people who are there, then not much is going to happen with it.
We've got a couple comments. Sorry. Yeah, I like what you're saying. We've got a couple comments from Jen, and I'll get to you in just a moment. But with the whole social media thing, the thing I want to talk about is the way that it works is if all you do is go on there and promote your show, people are going to start ignoring it unless they're really interested in your show. The general rule of thumb is on social media, you want to give more than you take. And if all you do is promote, all you're doing is taking. Go into groups, interact with them, be a part of the community, not just being there to spam your show. Post on your social media feed things that are important, things that have nothing to do with your show. If you've got information to share, just share it. You need to give value, not just ask people to give you something in return. Jen said, yo, been a while. Been super busy. Glad I was able to catch you all today. And, well, we've been super busy. Matt was off traveling to other parts of the world for a little bit, so we haven't been around that much lately either. So glad to see you. I think this is our second episode since you've been back, right?
That's right. Yep.
And
yeah. So
have
Jen,
you covered?
Yeah, all good.
Have you covered YouTube's new faceless policies yet? As far as I've understood them, it's really not changing anything. It's just clarified things. It's not going to really pose many problems for people who are making faceless content. It just has to do with, and at this point I can't remember the details, but the general take was that these faceless policies aren't really changing anything. It's just clarifying the existing rules that they had in place. Have you paid any attention to this? Do you have anything more concrete you can add than what I just tried to say?
Only that it's repetitive content that they mentioned as part of the change as well. So AI-based repetitive content would be probably stuff like AI-generated video footage with an AI-generated voice, speaking over, quotes of stuff repeated and lifted off other YouTube videos potentially. Like big quote channels, big podcast clipping kind of things. It's repetitive content that is a lot less prevalent than you'd imagine. Like I watched a DaVinci Resolve Studio tutorial that was a talking head of somebody that I am fairly certain was entirely AI generated and animated, but it was derived from a picture of this person. But I could tell from like the movement tics and the way that the mouth was moving with certain components of the video artifacting and stuff like that. It was definitely AI generated. But whether that would be targeted by this as repetitive content, definitely not. And any faceless YouTube channels that are creating faceless content, I think that repetitive component really plays a huge factor. So I don't think people are going to be hit by this in the way that kind of the furor came up for it. Because I actually saw this on LinkedIn. Someone posted it from a PowerPoint or something that they'd seen leaked somewhere and said, faceless content is dying. Here's the reason why, AI generation, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, as you said, it's a lot less rigorous, and it's not a huge policy change like people made it out to be. I don't think it's as big as people think.
And I think there were two arguments. The whole faceless part, because there are a lot of people who don't want to go on camera, so they're creating faceless channels. There's nothing wrong with that. It's the repetitive content part that is the key here. Since you brought that up, that reminded me of that part of it. So if you're doing like reaction videos, if you're someone like me who might take this live stream and break it down into smaller videos, that's not going to pose a problem. Even though it's repurposed, it's not looked at as repetitive. I can't remember exactly how YouTube described repetitive content, but it's basically stuff that's being mass produced by AI. Basically, you have some kind of automation, which is scraping ideas from somewhere, generating them, and just generating completely AI generated video. It's the video, the audio, there's nothing of value there. And I think that was the key point. Repetitive content that has no value, it's not going to be able to monetize. But nobody's really watching that stuff anyway. I think it was probably more a means to disincentivize people from creating a bunch of mass video that has no value, that nobody's going to watch, that's just taking up their server space. I think that's probably what the bottom line was. Because a lot of people are going, oh, we can create a ton of video with AI that takes no time, no effort, and it's just piling up a bunch of server space. Well, we're going to disincentivize them from thinking about that because they won't be able to monetize. And we're making it clear this kind of content won't be monetized or eligible for it. So if you're making real content, you're putting effort into it, even if you're using AI for some or all of it, if you're putting out valuable content that people are watching, you don't really have anything to worry about with this new faceless policy. That's been the general consensus I've seen across the board.
And as a good test, I think if you want to find out the kind of video they're talking about, look up on YouTube, fastest way to grow a faceless YouTube channel in 2025 for 6 figures or something like that. And that's probably the kind of video that they're trying to target. Stopping people just clogging up their servers, trying to get repeat views on algorithmically driven stuff that clickbait people into making them lots of money.
Yeah. But thank you for your comments, Jen. Thank you for watching. Matt, do you have anything before we wrap up?
Only that we have talked about the bad advice, but I hope, at least, from what people have heard or hopefully gone back to have a look at, that there is a case for the grey in the middle. There's not one good way and one bad way for any of the things that we talked about. There's a bit in the middle that is kind of where you have to play with things a little bit. It's going to be a little bit of your context. Some of it's going to be a little bit of learning for you to do. And some of it is recognizing when someone is, how I describe it, selling you certainty. When there isn't certainty, it's going to take a bit of work for you to get to the stage where your podcast or your content or whatever it is at the stage you need it to be. But with any bad advice, if you do get it and you get burnt by it, just don't get sucked in by it. Like the authenticity thing, maybe have a think about what authenticity means and what you'd prefer the product going out to your listeners to be. Or if someone says post on social media 3 times a week, and that means you've got less time to spend on your podcast, then that's probably a good justification for you not to do that. Play around with the middle, mess around with the gray, and you'll find the sweet spot for you.
Yeah, it's not black and white. Find good advice. But more than anything, whether you end up finding good advice or bad advice, you need to figure out what's best for you, what's going to work for you. You've got to find your own way. Trying to imitate what other people have done isn't always the best thing to do. Find your way. That's the best advice I can give to people. That doesn't mean don't look for advice, don't go online to try and find ways of doing things better. It just means whatever you're doing, find the best way for you. Sometimes you'll find guidance that, hey, this really works for me. Sometimes you won't. It's the way we go about anything. It's a learning process. We figure out what we want, what we don't want, what works for us, what doesn't. In the end, what we're looking for is finding what works best for us, puts less distractions, less friction in our process, so we can get stuff done better and faster. At least that's what I look for.
Mm-hmm. Satisfaction, contentment. It doesn't have to be walking waist high through a muddy river every time you do your podcast.
And
I think that's it.
I think that is it. Hopefully we didn't give any bad advice on this. But like we said at the beginning.
What, if someone can prove that a Blue Yeti is better than an SM7B or a U87, podcastage looking at you, Bandrew, if you're watching this, that's when we'll have to grab our hats and eat them. But only then. Only then.
Yeah. Not just that they can be equal or sound good, but to show that the Yeti is better in some measurable way than the U87. Just to clarify that.
Yeah. I think about it now, and it'd probably have to be a quantitative test as well as a qualitative test. And I don't know if that means we do a conference and get 2 rooms of separate people with the same demographic represented to listen to one or the other and then take notes. Maybe it's a harder job than I purport it to be, in which case that probably means the Blue Yeti isn't always the best microphone.
I think the only person that could pull that off is Bandrew. I think he's the only one that could pull off something like that. He's got the audience. He's got the mics. There's no better resource for probably short of lifelong audio engineers. And even then, he probably has more experience with more different types of microphones than most audio engineers.
Okay then, here it is. Anyone who's watched this and gotten this far, or anyone watching right now, tag Podcastage or Bandrew Scott on your social media. Let him know that we have put out this challenge, the Blue Yeti challenge. If you can find a case for the Blue Yeti being better than any other better microphone you can imagine, then we'll do something. I don't know. Let's not promise anything at this stage. We'll see if it gets to him first, and then we'll make the bet.
I can't even remember how we got on here, but yeah, I think just we're talking about bad advice, and
Yeah.
eating our hats if somebody can prove that the Yeti is better than the U87 in some measurable way.
That's it. But I don't think a lot of the stuff we've given here is bad. I think we've done a great job giving pretty good advice based on the bad stuff. And I'm sure there are
And the
other
thing
ways
is,
that they can get in touch with us.
advice is, it's all opinions anyway. There's no right or wrong here. But where can we find you and your podcast, your new podcast?
You can find me, Rethinking Podcasting, at rethinkingpodcasting.com. You can also head to mbpod.com to find out more about my editing and production services. And these days, I'm spending a lot of time on LinkedIn. So if you look for Matthew Bliss on LinkedIn, you'll be sure to find me, but it's linked on the website as well.
You can find me at Tansy Aster Audio, Tansy Aster Academy, tansyaster.com, mix.com, where we go into that's more based on business stuff and AI, automation, consulting, all of that fun stuff. We've got a YouTube channel for that, BB Remix. I don't remember the name. Can't remember if it was Brand and Business Remix or just it would be Brand and Business Remix. It's linked on the on my YouTube channel under my other channels. So if you're interested, go check that out. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.